What's going on, everybody? I wanted to make a quick video because I think a lot of people are under the impression that I don't think Yoimiya has any problems at all. I think a lot of people think that I'm blissfully ignorant. I've seen it in comments and on Twitch and stuff, so I wanted to clear up a couple things. And honestly, it's kind of my bad because I haven't made a video that just addresses her problems, and I do think that Yoimiya is a little bit underwhelming and does need a little bit of a buff, but we'll get there. The main thing that actually sparked my interest in doing a video on this is actually this Reddit post that I found this morning. Someone linked it to me on Twitter. It's called "Why Yoimiya Needs Fixing: An In-Depth Summary and Analysis of Her Kit." And I think that this Reddit post covered her issues more than we did on stream one day when I was trying to record this video live. So apologies to those of you who were there live when I was recording and we didn't get to actually finish the video, and we won't be using that footage here, but I appreciate you all being there anyways and being super supportive. That was awesome. But anyways, I just want to take a look at this because I felt like this Reddit post summarized it all very, very well. So as another disclaimer, I love Yoimiya as a character, and I think that you can clear all content in the game. Actually, in fact, I know you can clear all content in the game with her and other supports and things. I've done it. Look, here's the proof. I've literally cleared Spiral Abyss 12 with her and 3 4-stars. And one of them's like an actual free-to-play 4-star. But Brax, you have C6. Shut up, other people have cleared C0. It's doable. The amount of Doom posting I've seen on Yoimiya is completely fucking stupid. Like, I understand that some people want to buff, and I understand that people want to fix these problems. I agree with that. I think people saying that if you pull for Yoimiya, you ruin your account are fucking idiots. I'm gonna be honest. Anyways, apologies for the delay, let's read. So this person divides it into micro issues, macro issues, and game mechanic issues. And these are all worth addressing to some extent. So Yoimiya, if you don't know, her last 3 hits in her combo do the most damage. Specifically, her hit 5 doing 188%. I don't know what level this is actually. But if you look at this image for reference, you can kind of see the damage difference, right? It's a pretty big hit. For most characters, this isn't really an issue because the damage scaling isn't that reliant on getting to the last hit. The last hit will always do more damage, but it's never this big of a difference. So the issue is that Yoimiya can't really dodge, because if she dodges, you lose a ton of damage over time because you're losing out on hit 4 and 5 or 3 or whatever hits you're losing later in the string. If you dodge, you're missing a ton of damage. Not to mention that with Xingqiu, if you're at C0, she vaporizes 1, 3, and 5. And so if you miss 3 or 5, you're shit out of luck. This basically means that you need a shield character with her. And I know that her banner has Xinyan and Diona, and Diona's actually fine for shields, but Xinyan is probably the worst shield in the game. I honestly wonder if Beidou has a better shield than her. Beidou at Constellation 1, that is. Yeah, I don't know which one actually absorbs more, but you get the point. Xinyan's shield is made of paper, Diona is fine, Noelle is fine, Zhongli is fine, but basically it requires you to play Yoimiya with one of them. Now the issue is that Melt Yoimiya is actually not super great. The only character you can really get like a super effective melt on consistently is Ganyu, and even then it can get kind of messy. So realistically, using Diona with Yoimiya is a little weird. She would be much better off in other teams. But regardless, the other thing they address is range, but her range is actually really short too. I mean, it's about the same as the other archers in the game, but the problem is that that bow range is just kind of short because you can't use charged attacks with her unless you want to do like marshmallow damage. So if you don't want to get your autos interrupted, you have to have a super thick shield, and that's a big problem. There are other characters that need a similar thing, but you have very few resources to actually take care of that. And I think requiring Zhongli for a 5-star to be playable is bad. As you can see, I cleared Abyss with Noelle. It's doable, it works, but you're basically forced to make your team comp have that if you want to maximize your damage. And here's a video of her range. I really don't like... Yeah, I mean, it sucks. Like, that's it. It just sucks. They also go on to mention that it's not just her autos or burst is missing a good portion of the time. I've had the burst miss a couple of times, though it hasn't been like super detrimental to me, but I can understand the issues there. Her burst already kind of sucks as is, but if you're missing out on it, it is a big portion of her damage and her only AoE, so yeah. And I mean, they just talk about targeting and stuff here. Basically, this can be a big problem in things like Abyss where you have all the samurais charging around. If you're trying to finish off one enemy at a time, because let's be honest, that's the easiest thing to do if you want to mitigate the amount of stress you're gonna have, it gets a little difficult when the 3 of them are just teleporting around you. So the argument is just that the kit doesn't really work as intended. The original poster of this also goes on to explain her E scaling is bad, and this I actually agree with. I don't necessarily know that it's like a massive issue for her considering that she does decent damage. It's multiplicative unlike other scalings in the game, which are all additive, but the problem is that it adds so little going up a talent. This person then goes on to say that leveling her E is kind of a joke and a waste of materials. materials, which also makes one of her constellations a joke as well. So this is just a design flaw. This isn't something that directly affects your gameplay as much, because even if they fixed this and made you do more damage, you still have all the single target issues. But this is definitely something that should be addressed. Even with a small buff, this could be fixed. And as you can see, low priority from Yoimiya mains already went on to talk about this. They made a chart basically saying leveling up E after 6 is not ideal. It's a buff overall, but not enough to justify the resin spent. And this is like even including if you're maining her. Like I triple crowned her, and that basically was the biggest waste of resources that anyone could have had on an account right now. Like, to put this in perspective, crowning a Xinyan would get you like more value overall than leveling up E past 6. For those of you who don't play on PC, E is her elemental skill. And then for another comparison, they also talk about Xiao's Q. Xiao's Q's scaling is significantly higher than Yoimiya's, and it makes leveling Xiao's burst actually worth doing. So then they talk about team drafting, and this one's a little weird for me because I've always felt that Genshin is a very flexible game, because you could make the same argument that this person's about to make about any character really, but it's not an invalid argument either, so let's go over it. Basically it says, it's incredibly difficult to draft a team for her without using multiple of the following units: Zhongli, Kazuha, Jincho, Beidou, Sucrose if no Kazuha, Jean if C2, Xiangling or even Albedo for Geo Resonance, and on top of that, Bennett is compulsory. So the thing is, she doesn't actually really need Bennett. Bennett's like a really good unit with her, and probably one of her top synergies, just because Bennett's already an insane unit, but at C6, even if you've ruined your Bennett, you're still able to get a pyro damage bonus out of him. I've found that running Bennett with her can actually be kind of annoying depending on the enemies that you're fighting, because if you get overloaded, then you get knocked back and it ruins your combo, whatever. Like again, for example, I didn't even use Bennett on this side and it was just fine. Then there's the whole like Fireworks Firecracker team comp where you use Beidou and Fischl, and the thing is, Beidou and Fischl have always been really strong units, and especially with Child, if you're using the Fireworks composition, these two are awesome. A lot of people swear by Beidou now just because Beidou was found to do like a lot of damage by some theory crafters, and Fischl's just a really great battery. So you can argue using these characters in a lot of different team comps. However, I'm gonna also present the argument that you don't necessarily need them with any particular other characters. You could make that argument for Child, but Child could also just use Xiangling and be an enabler for her and still be one of the best combinations in the game. So to be honest, this team section isn't really that relevant, because while Yoimiya does want to use the top supports, so does literally every other character in the game. But then the argument here that they make is also valid, right? Where you can replace Yoimiya with any other carry in the game, and they're gonna do better off in this position with these same supports. You could replace Yoimiya with Hu Tao, and then Hu Tao would take advantage of this better. You could replace her with Ganyu, Child, any one of those carries, even Xiao, and they take better advantage of this, which is, it's fine. I get it. But this isn't a Yoimiya problem, this is a game problem. If you were to make a unit that worked with all of the 4 stars that weren't top supports, that would be the first unit to do that. So this team section, while like I get what they're trying to say about how Yoimiya doesn't do anything better than the other carries, because that's basically what this comes down to, is it's not worth using the top supports with her if you have another character that can use them better. And I understand that argument, but I do think that the team argument isn't really that relevant to the post, because again, to me, it feels more like an argument with the game's design and character's design rather than Yoimiya's design specifically. That being said, I would like to see her being able to do a little bit better, and I'll talk about this right at the end. Oh, and they actually bring up single target right here. So it's no secret that Yoimiya is single target only DPS. Her arrows can only hit one thing, her CA can only hit one thing, and her Q kind of has a tiny AoE, but unless you're using Venti for that, it really is only going to ever hit one enemy. So I actually didn't use Venti, as you can see on my clears here, and I was hitting multiple people with her Q, but that's because I was grouping them up in a certain way in the corner of her room, and that's more of a like an Abyss playstyle thing. In the overworld, you're probably not going to be hitting multiple enemies unless you're using Sucrose or something. The overload will for sure though, and being locked in single target only means that any DPS that does less than half as much damage as you but in AoE can actually do way more damage. And this is true. So this is something that I've wanted to address for a while, but the problem is that I mean, first off, I'm an NA creator with like less than 40k subs. Like, I'm not gonna, why would MiHoYo listen to me about character balance? I have no idea, right? But in my opinion, this could be fixed. Like, this small thing would be fixed if you gave her arrows Ningguang C1. For those of you who don't know what Ningguang C1 does, it basically gives your hits a small AoE, just like a really small one, but it's enough so that if enemies are grouped up, it hits multiple enemies. And I think that as a Fireworks character, if they gave her arrows when infused, that tiny little AoE, it would be a significant jump in damage for her. Like, she would definitely definitely be playable over other pyro characters, especially with grouping tools like Venti. Now again, that brings up another issue of like, oh, she requires this other 5-star to hit her maximum potential, which is the same issue that we were talking about with Zhongli. Again, obviously you can use other 4-star units, but it would be better than nothing, and in fact I think it would be an incredibly good addition to the game that wouldn't necessarily break it. I don't think it should be constellation locked either, I just mean I want her to have that effect. Then this person says that her damage isn't actually that great even against world bosses and stuff, which is fine. I guess I really never had problems with her damage, but I also C6'd her and got her weapon and got her talent out to level 10 and whole laundry list of things. I'm gonna be honest, like, I think her damage is workable. Like, even if it's worse than other characters, that's not a problem. Like, being worse than a top DPS does not mean that your character is automatically shit, right? And that's something that people are doom posting about again and again, right? She's not even as good as Hu Tao Vape, literally dog shit unplayable. Like, the character is not even worth looking at. I fucking spit on Yoimiya, like, dog shit. Worst character in the game, can't even beat Hu Tao DPS. It's so dumb, dude. It doesn't matter who you are. If every single character is better than the last character, that's how you get power creep, and this is what a lot of the community is afraid of. So I'm not saying that Yoimiya's bad design is justified. I'm absolutely not saying that. I think she does need a buff. However, even if she gets beaten out by Hu Tao, it's not the end of the world and your account's not ruined for pulling her. So here's game mechanic issues, and we're gonna talk about internal cooldown and all that stuff here. So her internal cooldown on reactions and inability to snapshot her burst are two of her biggest issues. I've been thinking about the ICD thing a lot. So the ICD is basically an internal cooldown that prevents you from reacting more than once within a certain amount of time. And for Yoimiya, that's on 3 hits or 2.5 seconds. At C6, Yoimiya gets to react significantly more often because she gets that extra arrow that helps with her internal cooldown. But at C0, it's there and it's preventing you from getting a lot more reactions. Now here's the thing. If they lowered her internal cooldown, she wouldn't be vaporizing 1, 3, and 5. And 1, 3, and 5 are definitely the hits that you want to vaporize. You don't want to hit 2 and 4 with Vaporize. It's significantly weaker than 1, 3, and 5, and that creates a big problem for her with Vaporize. However, for Overload, if her ICD was reduced, she would be a much stronger unit because Overload is an AoE reaction, and if she could consistently hit Overload, then it would justify making her a single target DPS, because then at least if she's reacting every single time because she has no ICD or a lower ICD, then in that way she has her own niche, because that's one of the biggest issues Yoimiya has right now, is that she has her own niche, but she's not even better than other people at it. Hu Tao charge attack, Klee charge attack, Diluc skill, and Yan phase charge attack, all of these don't have internal cooldowns, and so those units can use Vaporize consistently. Yoimiya attacks a lot faster than them, and if we remove the ICD, Vaporize is ruined, right? Like, Vaporize is not going to be consistent enough to justify using it on Yoimiya over another pyro carry. However, it would make her the overload DPS, and in fact it would make her viable with elemental mastery to some extent. The other issue with the ICD is that it applies to her burst, and I think that if they fixed this for her burst even, that would make her a significantly better unit. Like, if they literally just made it so that the ICD lined up with the ticks of her burst, she would be so much better off, because then at the least you could get overloads or vaporizes off on her burst consistently. But then they also talk about snapshotting, which I mentioned as well. Snapshotting is basically if Yoimiya leaves Bennett's AoE buff or Kazuha's buff, she loses the buff on her elemental burst, and I think all characters that don't snapshot like this have a really rough time. I honestly think that this one might have been an oversight. I can't imagine a reason for them doing something like this. I don't know if in the code it has a like checkbox that says snapshot, you know? I don't know if that's what's going on, or whether or not it's something that they just kind of overlook. Either way though, I think that needs to be fixed. Like 100%, there is no harm in them fixing the snapshot at all, especially considering how mobile of a unit she needs to be, unless you're using a shield. Like, unless you have the strongest shield in the game and you can just stand and Bennett buff the entire time, she needs a snapshot. Now they bring up burst procs. This one is, I mean, honestly, I don't think this is that big of an issue. Everyone's pissed that she can't proc her own burst. The problem with her burst for me is the damage scaling on her burst. Her damage scaling gets out DPS'd by Albedo if you're not reacting, right? Albedo can do more damage for less value, less investment even. But I don't necessarily think Yoimiya needs to be able to proc her own burst, because the optimal way to play Yoimiya is with off-field supports. Would it be nice if she could? Sure, I agree. But I don't think think she needs to be able to. I think that this is just a gameplay design that they were putting in to make sure that you knew to use her with off-field supports, but that's my opinion on it. A lot of people will probably disagree and say that like you need to be able to proc it with Yoimiya. It has not been an issue for me, but I understand the concern. Oh boy, Shimenawa's reminiscence. Okay, so this is the last thing they're kind of talking about before they talk about skill ceiling and stuff, and we won't go over that. But Yoimiya's best in slot artifact set that was arguably designed for her is actually a DPS decrease for her kit if you're not using it the perfect, correct way, right? And for those of you guys saying to just ignore her burst, no. If you ignore her burst, Crimson Witch Gladiator does more damage. Because with Crimson Witch Gladiator, you can use her burst and auto attack, so she ends up out damaging Shimenawa, right? That's not an opinion, that's a fact. It's backed by math. If you don't have enough energy recharge to justify running Shimenawa, Shimenawa does worse damage. Now, is it the end of the world if you use it? No. But basically, the whole portion of this side of the post was just to say that Shimenawa is anti-synergistic, which is correct, right? It doesn't necessarily work perfectly with her kit, considering how little energy she actually generates. And this person goes on to show their stats and that they've cleared Abyss, so they know what they're talking about. Okay, so now that we've gotten to the end of this post, that's basically everything that I've had a problem with and that the community's had a problem with around her kit. And I wanted to go ahead and give kind of my feedback on it. First off, again, to address people that are doom posting, your account isn't ruined if you pull Yoimiya. You know, for those saying new players should avoid Yoimiya at all costs, it's not that deep. It really isn't. Yoimiya is not a perfect unit, and she's not close to other top DPS. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it, that's facts, right? But that doesn't make her unusable, and in fact, if you enjoy the character and you want the character, then pull for the fucking character. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, right? But again, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it and say that she doesn't have her own issues. And honestly, if any single one of these issues was solved, if like one of these things that we talked about today was addressed, she would be a significantly better unit. But I think the biggest thing for me is definitely the AoE. I don't think the team thing is that big of a deal because every other DPS in the game wants to use those best supports. That's just because they're the best supports. It's not because they necessarily need them, right? And her auto attacks without her E infusion, the multipliers in my opinion are actually okay. They're not enough to justify her being completely single target though. Her E scaling is absolutely horrendous. It's almost not worth doing at all. However, you should just get it up to level 6 at least because that's the last level you can get really for decent resin investment. But really, I really truly think that if they gave her Ningguang C1 and just let her infused arrows hit a tiny AoE around every enemy, everyone would be fine with her kit. Her kit has tons of problems, but I think that this one change could genuinely bring her from like whatever tier she's in up a tier and a half. Because the big problem right now is that she can't keep up with other characters even by relying on other characters that are like top supports. But if she was able to do the AoE herself, you could justify not using those top tier supports and running things like either Mono Pyro or Overload with characters like EMC. Basically, I don't think that Overload's existence is a good justification for her not having AoE. I think that her burst misses too often. I think that her burst does too low damage. I think that being extremely vulnerable when attacking is something that obviously we have to build a team around, but I think the characters that are in the game aren't good enough to justify that. Fuck, buff Xinyan, man. If you buff Xinyan, you're also buffing Yoimiya. You're buffing the shit out of Yoimiya. Really, it is that black and white. I don't know. This is my take on it. Again, I've cleared Abyss 12 with her, and I do have C6 and her weapon, but there's people that have cleared it with C0 with Rust. This Abyss is more of a DPS check on your supports. Have you built your supports enough to do damage in addition to your main DPS? Like, I could probably replace Yoimiya with like Amber here and I still would clear. But anyways, you guys, these are the issues that I see with Yoimiya, and if I were miHoYo, I would look at any of these issues, fix any single one of them. Well, I mean, please fix more. But even with just one of them fixed, even with just AoE fixed, or maybe even ICD so that way Overload can be more consistent or anything, she's a much better unit for it. It's not going to stop me from playing her. I love the character so much. I've been enjoying the shit out of this character. She's so fun. Her personality's great, and I can't wait to keep using her. I just hope that miHoYo looks at this and goes, okay, maybe we messed up here. She doesn't need to be the best at any one particular thing, but for a 5-star unit, she definitely shouldn't be this far behind. One last thought I had is that maybe she's just meant to enable supports to do damage. Maybe she's meant to turn your supports into DPS because she attacks so fast that your Beto hits are more consistent, your EMC hits are more consistent. Maybe if Raiden has something similar to EMC, maybe your Raiden hits will be more consistent. But even then, it doesn't really justify her issues. So those are my thoughts. If you guys have enjoyed, make sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. I wouldn't be the #1 Yoimiya fan if I didn't at least know this much about her and what issues she was suffering from. So thank you for watching this video, everyone, and I will catch you guys later.